This is the MOJO, the Meaning of Life and Business podcast, where life and business intersect. Hosted by Jennifer Glass, CEO of Business Growth Strategies International and BGSI Coaching. We are dedicated to your success. Hello and welcome to another episode of MOJO, the Meaning of Life and Business. For those of you that are first-time listeners here, thank you so much for taking the time and checking out the show. And for those of you that are returning, thank you so much for your loyal support over these last few years. On our episode today, we are going to be talking about leadership and building teams. What does it mean to be a leader? How are we looking at being a good leader? And being a leader is sometimes an extremely difficult task. Look at most leaders. They get blamed for one thing or another when things go wrong. And sometimes when things go right, they're not always given the credit, even though we're not trying to say, I have to get the credit on everything, as a certain person tends to do. But we're not going there. What we need to be thinking about is really, what does it mean to be a leader, and how do we create and motivate our teams to have success? And I have a really great guest on the show today who's going to help us really figure out what it means to be a good leader and how we can really look at creating and managing these teams. And we're even going to revisit ikigai, which is a really great Japanese idea. And you'll get a little bit more information on that. And I'm not saying ikigai, just in case anyone didn't get that. Before I bring my guest on, though, let me tell you a little bit about him. Jon Sheldon is a leadership and executive coach who helps people lead with clarity, build with purpose, and stay grounded in what actually matters. With a background in the Marines and a career leading teams in finance and business, he spent the last 15 plus years coaching high performers, from sales leaders to CEOs, on how to grow without losing themselves in the process. Jon, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me, Jennifer.
Absolutely. Thank you. And again, Jon, thank you so much for your service.
I appreciate that.
Anytime I meet a vet, I have to make sure that I thank you, because you do so much for us that we don't do ourselves. You put your lives on the line so that we don't have to. And our liberties and freedom, really, we have to understand that someone is paying for those. And so if you're listening, I really encourage you, anytime you do see a vet, thank them. Sometimes it's the little small things that can make a huge difference. So again, thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate that. It feels, honestly, it's crazy to think about now. It's coming up on 20 years soon. Oh no, it was 20 years since boot camp in September, which is pretty nuts. Pretty crazy. Yeah. Time flies.
That it does. I'm just curious, what made you join the armed services?
Oh, that's a great question. My grandfather was a Marine. My uncle was a Marine. I was always really fascinated by it. For better or worse, in my senior year, my dad and I were watching the Battle of Fallujah. And realistically, when the names kept popping up of how old the Marines were that were dying, they were all like 19, which I think that's one of the things that shatters perception when you talk about the military, is when it's perceived in movies like it's Chris Hemsworth or whoever it is, right? Like the majority of the military is younger than 21, right? So that kind of shocked me, and that kind of made my decision. I actually was already accepted to go to college, and I just looked at my dad and said, well, if they're willing to go sacrifice, then what makes me better? And so I signed up when I was 17.
Semper Fi. Thank you.
Semper Fi.
Yes. Thank you. So
appreciate it.
Absolutely. And again, the military, it's great as a training ground for leadership, because you really have to, first of all, you're learning from your superiors. And every order that you get from your superiors, you got to be following it, because otherwise you could be court-martialed and everything else from there, notwithstanding some controversies on the economic or not the economic, the political climate that we find ourselves in as the day of this recording. But that's an entirely separate story. Again, just understanding leadership. So I'm curious though, Jon, if you took away one or two leadership principles that you gained from the military, what would those be?
I think one's a leadership principle, two would be, and then the third one is just a qualification of leadership, I would call it. So I'll start with the final one first. And this has been it's actually been weighing on my mind quite a lot lately. I took on a recent client and they're struggling with this a little bit. And that is that leadership comes with a cost that I don't think most people are willing to pay. And what that means is being a true leader, not a sales manager. Like there's a lot of those out there, right? Being a true leader comes at a cost. And a lot of times that means some maybe important relationships. That means time, it means energy. That means caring about other people more than you care about yourself, which I think is one of the core leadership tenets, if you want to call it, that I believe in, is that's elevating others. True leaders elevate others over themselves. A true leader's merit should be based on the accomplishments of his followers, quite frankly, for lack of a better term, right? Not what he does or she does, but in what those people that you're leading do, right? That is leadership at its core, right? So my last and stop me if I'm going on a tangent, but my last career, I was the director of sales for a company, and the guy who took over, my protege, we'll call it, is doing incredible, right? That's the best thing I could have thought of, right? For myself, is that you expand and go past, and with the people that you've trained, developed, led, they become better versions than you. And that's taking the ego out of it. There is no place for ego in leadership, in my opinion. You should be constantly trying to get your quote unquote followers to be better versions than you ever were, to create more leaders. That is part of the burden of leadership, right? Is that it's not about you. And I think a lot of people struggle with that. And I think a lot of corporations struggle with that nowadays, because generally speaking, when you get put into leadership positions, or more likely management positions, it's because you're really good at selling something. Let's call it what it is. The majority of leadership positions are filled by top performers in sales, right? And there's a lot of data to show that. That doesn't make you a good leader, right? So that's another thing that the Marine Corps taught me, was that yes, performance definitely matters for a lot of reasons, but it's not the end all be all. You can still be a great performer and a terrible leader, right? And you can be a bad performer and a great leader, right? When you get the combination of the both, that's when you get a lot of traction in leadership, right? Because if you're not a good performer and you have subordinates or followers that are really good performers, right, there is this thing that we don't like to talk about if people doubt your skill and your service. And then the other piece that I really gravitate towards, as far as what I got from Marine Corps leadership, is tact and toughness, right? Meaning that, yeah, you got to have tact and you got to kind of be tough sometimes, right? To be a leader in a lot of different ways. You have to make hard decisions that aren't popular, right? And most people, again, are not prepared for that, right? They want to make everybody happy. You won't. It doesn't work like that, right? You get to do what's right for your people, first and foremost, for the mission, if that's the case. And you can change out mission for whatever else you want to talk about, right? But yeah, those are kind of the highlights, I would say, from leadership on what I took from the Marines.
It's like you were just saying, in terms of the leader, the positions that you have to take, and I'm going to use the commander in chief as an example of what the positions they have to take. And sometimes it is an impossible decision.
Yeah.
You either, and I'm thinking back to the aftermath of 9/11, where President Bush needed to decide if he was going to be shooting down American aircraft in order to avoid additional, for lack of what I'm saying it, missiles going into more buildings and killing even more people. And that in and of itself is an extreme decision. And it's not like you have time to really think. It is, you've got 5 minutes to give an answer. And so sometimes the thought that we have to take is immediate, sometimes we can look at what the values are on either side and then make a decision from there, like in the corporate world. But even in the corporate world, sometimes those decisions need to be a lot quicker. And I'm just thinking if we go back to last summer with the Coldplay incident, if you remember
Oh,
that
right.
particular incident,
Yeah. Yeah,
just
I
to
forgot
bring
about
back
that.
a blast from the past, the
Right.
company that the CEO and the HR director were seen having the affair at the concert, that company had to make a very quick decision. What are we going to do about our leadership? Because they needed to say, we're ending our relationship with the CEO and with the HR director because it's not going to be something that lives up to our morals as a company. And so all of this definitely has a hand in what we do.
Yeah, it's a scenario that I used. Actually, the first time I really brought it up was when I went to college, and we're talking about decision making, this ticking time bomb scenario, which is how I would classify what you just talked about, right? Needing to make a decision quickly, right? And that's why I bring up cost, because a lot of times you don't have the time to understand fully the cost of decision making when you're in that leadership role, and you do have limited time in order to do that. And the world's moving faster and faster, Jennifer. We both know that. So making decisions becomes even more important, and having that the confidence, I would say, to stick to it for better or worse and adapt if you need to, right? And I think that's what a lot of people get stalled out from, is they get stuck in hard decisions because they're afraid of the aftermath. There's always a cost to every decision. It's how you adapt beyond that that will make you a good leader.
Absolutely. So I wanted to go back to something else that you mentioned, and
Okay.
that was the inspirational, motivational aspect of a leader. How important is that inspirational and motivational aspect of a leader in terms of pushing their team to be better? And like you said, your protege now doing so much better than you ever thought they would. How does inspiration and motivation, how much of a leader's job is to do that as opposed to really push for an end result? Like an example in the military is a particular mission. It's not just inspiring and motivating your team.
Right.
It's we got to succeed.
It's a great question. I think it's a, man, importance level. I'd say it's high depending on who you're leading. And that's not a cop out answer. I think that's the truth. Guys like me, I don't really get into the motivation stuff. I'm far more factual and in reality. Like that's where I like to be, right? So even in the Marines way back when, that never really spoke to me that much. But I think it's really important because for a lot of guys, it is. And I think that's one of the most important pieces of leadership is being adaptable, like we just talked about, is looking at who you're leading and understanding what they need, right? It's kind of like the five love languages. I wish that book was out, back when I was in the Marines. It would have probably been an awesome book for a young Marine leader to read, quite frankly, right? Understanding what other people value. You can use that not only in relationships, but I mean, you are in a relationship. Like your squad members, your team members are relationships, right? The world is filled with those. So I think it's really important, but I also think it's really important to understand that it's not for everybody. Because I've been in many scenarios where the super motivation, inspirational leader falls really flat because it's over the top, right? It's too rah rah. It's like, no, 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 this is reality. We're going to war, and especially after you've been there, you realize there isn't really much glamour here, right? All the hype was a lie, right? In a lot of senses, right? It was there's a lot of crazy stuff that happens. There's a lot of really cool stuff that happens. There's a lot of terrifying stuff that happens. And so I think inspiration is really important in order to get people started, right? Because I think everybody's influenced by that, and at least a little bit. Even guys like me who don't really buy into it, like even I am influenced by that, right? It's understanding of where you need to cut it off and get real, right? And not necessarily real on a result, right? But real on a situation. And so inspiration, I think, is really, really powerful in doses in the right framework, right? You can't be the same leader to everybody. It doesn't work like that. You can be the same person, or you can be your authentic leadership, which I talk about a lot and I'm a huge, massive passion around. But that doesn't mean everybody needs to be led the same way, right? And so to answer your question, yes, is it important? Absolutely. I think it's within moderation though. Right? I really do.
And it's so important, like you said, within moderation, because again, if it's too over the top, like you mentioned as well, it doesn't necessarily meet the same kind of interest
Yeah.
that everyone else is looking at. And again, it's because of the fact that they may not buy into your version of
Yeah.
leadership. And so if they don't believe in you because you're too fake, if you
Yeah.
will, at being over the top, they're not going to have that shared values. And I think that's one of the things that as a leader, you need to be great at creating
Yeah.
and managing. Because if you can manage and create those values that everybody agrees with, that's more than half the job. Would you
Yes.
agree?
I would 100% agree. I think it's more than half the job too. I think that's a good way to put it. Because it goes back to that word authenticity, right? If you're the guy that's or lady that's screaming all the time and not like yelling, but like super jazzed up all the time, it doesn't come across as authentic, right? Because nobody's like that. And you know those people in your life too. I'm assuming, Jennifer, that like behind closed doors, after the cameras quote unquote go away, when the people are not around, they change personalities, right? That's what people think of when you're too over the top with it. Just be, and if you're a naturally energetic and inspiring person, all the power to you. Be that person. But people want real. And I think that's one of the things that I've noticed with at least my generation is we're sick of kind of the fakeness. Well, we want real. We want real people talking about real stuff. And if you're super motivated by it and inspirational, awesome. But also just be a person, right? Like,
Right.
you know what I mean?
I mean,
Or be a character.
yes. I'm just curious because I'm thinking you mentioned about the always, on and always super nice and everything. And the one person that comes to mind, and I really do think that he really was this way, was Mr. Rogers.
Oh yeah, yeah,
Fred Rogers, I mean,
yeah.
his
I've heard that too,
life
actually.
on screen and his life off screen, I don't think we're really different.
Yeah, and that's awesome. Right. I tend to agree with you. Like, there are people out there, but that was his authenticity. And I think that
Right.
proves me. That's just exactly my point. Like that was who he was. So if you're out there and you're a leader, just be who you are all the time. And it'll
Exactly.
come through that way.
Yep.
Right.
Yes, thank you. And just as he said, always look to the good people whenever there's anything going on. And again, that goes down to the leaders too, because those leaders are the ones that are the helpers, right? If you think about any kind of response, there's always the leaders saying, all right, we got to do this, we got to do this, we got to go there, we have to be over here. And all of these different pieces are so key. So that brings me though to teams, right? Because a leader is creating and managing teams.
Yep.
How do we start looking at team development from a leadership perspective to really be getting the most out of what we're doing? Sometimes a leader, like you mentioned earlier, a leader is promoted because they're good at sales or they're good at something. And so they're
Yeah.
inheriting a team, they're not creating it. But if
Yeah.
we're looking at creating a team, let's go there before we talk about managing an inherited team. How do
Absolutely.
we
Yeah.
start looking at creating a team that can work based on our particular leadership style in whatever manner, shape, or form that may take?
Yeah. Yep. Great question. Yeah. So I think first and foremost is, especially when we talk about business in the civilian world, just business in general, I guess, is I really want to get away from the term recruitment personally. I like the term selection much better, right? And I'll tell you why. Because if you're building a team, who's a part of that team matters a lot. Like them as a baseline matters a lot. And you go into just even personal and professional development, you want to surround yourself by high achievers, right? Or whatever type of achievement you want to be. If you want to not be a high achiever, cool. Surround yourself with one of those. I don't care. Right. But you want to surround yourself with people that compliment you and that challenge you. Right. And hopefully that are better than you. And I think that's one of the big things is selection, right? Selecting people, a part of your sphere, a part of your community, a part of your leadership circle that do those things for you, that are either better than you in other skills as part of a team. That's what I'm always encouraging myself and others to do is, no. You don't want to be the best. You want to be the best leader. You don't want to be the best salesperson. You don't want to be the best marketer. You don't want to be the best executive assistant. You don't want to be the best at those. You shouldn't, at least. You should want to be the best leader. That's an entirely skill, and if you're doing it right, an entire job by itself, in my opinion. So selection matters a lot if you're taking it from that angle, where that's the first step. It's selection. Think of every, in my opinion, or not even, like, think of every elite thing, like organization you can think of, right? Where the probability of you being in there, and you look at those people and say, man, you are the top. They all go through a selection process, all of them. And the other thing that they do, and this is totally off topic, is they practice way more than they play, right? And that's into team development right there. But so first and foremost, I think it's selection, is picking the right people. And when you're doing that, in my opinion, again, you should challenge yourself. You should not. I know that people do business with people they like, and that is 100% true. That's a sales statistic, though. When you're building a team, you shouldn't. I mean, I think you're honestly probably doing it wrong if you like everybody, quite frankly. Because if you do, then they're probably agreeing with you too much. They're not probably challenging you enough. They're probably not offering up opinions enough, right? They're probably not as confident as they probably should be in the role or the billet of that team, right? So I think that's another big piece too, is hire people that kind of make you uncomfortable, right? You have to fit the culture, obviously. And I think that's a no-brainer. And when I say culture, I wrap that into selection. It's a big piece of it, right? Is they have to fit the culture and the community that you're creating. They have to be proficient at what they do, or they've got to challenge the norm that you're trying to create. And I think all of those things are great. I mean, I'm thinking back to a Marine that I had in a squad and on my second deployment. And man, looking back at it, he was a pain in my ass. Like he really was. But when I look at what he kind of taught me as a leader, it was huge. It was huge that he was difficult for me, because he brought a different aspect of intelligence, honestly, to that Marine Corps squad that I was running that was unlike anybody else on the team. He was smart. When we tapped into what he was truly really good at and gave him permission to fail, he rose. And I think that was really interesting too. And I would have never figured that out if he wasn't a pain, right? If he didn't challenge authority tactfully, but challenged it quite frequently, right? I think that's a big piece of it, is surrounding yourself with people that push you as a leader, right? And that have that mentality that they want to be better, right? I think that's a big, important piece of building a really effective team. There's a bunch more, but I think those are the two big ones.
Absolutely. And, one of the things you mentioned was about having people that challenge you. And it's so key. I mean, anytime I'm working with my clients as a business coach with them, and I'm helping them with the strategy and helping them find number two, it is so important to not have a yes man or a yes woman. Because if all you're doing is getting that yes person, it doesn't allow for growth in the business, because you're not being challenged. They're not thinking differently. They're not presenting a competing thought. And I even do that on my board. And I sit on many different boards in the nonprofit space trying to get more on the for-profit side, but that's, a different story. But I try and, with board development, I try and find people who are also going to be different. Because if everybody is of the same mindset that we're only going to say yes to whatever the leadership presents, nothing is ever going to change. Because if the leadership has been there for 15 years, guess what happens? It gets stagnant. right? And you
Scale. Yeah.
need that fresh ideas that are in there. And so it's so key in that regard. But Jon, I wanted to ask you though, on the flip side of the original question, inherited teams, right? And I mentioned that earlier when I started asking the question. If you inherit a team because you get promoted to being on top of that team, so someone else was there before, they maybe moved on or they moved to a different position, within the company, and you're now taking over that department or that role, or maybe even the whole company in the C-suite. How does that change moving in as a leader of inherited teams differ
Mm.
from a creating your own team? Because there's going to be much different dynamics because you can't just fire everyone and bring in your own folks, even though you might want to.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great question, and I want to call back real quick before you answer that. One of the most important things that I talk about all the time is who's your number two. In my opinion, it's the most important member of the team is who's that first team leader, who's that second in charge, right? Who's that first mate on a boat captainship. But so I love that you brought that up. Thank you. It's so, in my opinion, it's so huge. Right? That's the most important position on a team. Inherited teams. So gather your data. There's no better way to put that than that. So when you come in, do your job as a leader and seek first to understand, right? So meet with your team, understand them, how they work, what motivates them, what doesn't motivate them, what they really care about. I think that's really undersold, right? Most people, there's a lot of other things that people care about in life outside of just money, right? So motivating people just on a dollar basis or bonus basis is weak sauce, in my opinion. So gather your data. That's where we go back to that selection process and building a team. Well, you don't have that option, right? So what's the next best thing you have right now? Gather the data. Sit down with every single person, be a human being, right? Tell them your story. We are a civilization. We are a human race of storytellers. Tell them your story and learn theirs, because you can't possibly be an effective leader to that person if you don't understand their story. And I truly believe that. So understand that, and then understand something what I call like the blueprint, right? So where are they most effective in life? Are they in the right seat? Most people never get asked that question. They get a job, they get on a team, they do well, but they might not really even enjoy it. Maybe they're just good at it. That's where that ikigai comment comes in, right? That ikigai, that thought process, the Japanese so elegantly termed probably centuries ago. But understanding what that means, what is their purpose, what's their vision, right? Where are they going? And I think that's really important, because what you don't want to do is, like you just said, you don't want to get in there and burn the boats and say, I'm going to bring in my new team and this is broken. No, it's probably not. It's probably not. They're probably very proficient people. They're probably just been led bad if they're underperforming. And I truly believe that. I do think that the burden of leadership is that it all comes back to you. So you got to gather your data, you got to understand your people, and then you got to set the tone, in my opinion. That's where I mentioned earlier, tact and toughness matters. Be tactful, but also be tough, right? And it doesn't mean you have to be this hard person, right? You can be empathetic and tactfully tough at the same time. They're not mutually exclusive, right? You can care about your people and be tough when it matters. And I think that does matter, setting a good standard. I always allow people the opportunity to fail, and then you lay down the law and say, hey, look, no, this is how we're going to do it, right? Part of that, and there's this, I'm sure it's much older than I've been aware of it, but there's this servant leadership, right? I have no idea when this came on the scene, but in my leadership journey, I learned about it probably 8 years ago or so. And I think that's really important. But one of the most important things that I find is lacking when people really buy into servant leadership is they don't have a high enough standard. And setting the standard, not like barking orders, but setting a standard of what a team is and getting the entire team bought into that, coupled with the other things I just mentioned, coupled with getting to know your people, giving them trust and confidence to make errors and mistakes, putting them in the right seat and saying, hey, I trust you to do this, but being very clear of there is a quote unquote mission to accomplish. There is a standard that we play by on this team. And what you often realize is that people will rise to that, or they'll self-select themselves out. If they shouldn't be on the team that you want to create, they'll find another one. They will. It'll make it uncomfortable. If you're trying to build excellence, people that are not performing excellent feel very uncomfortable around people that are. That's the truth. A players want to be around A players, and anybody that's not an A player does not want to be on a team with other A players. They just don't. It makes them feel uncomfortable every day.
Absolutely. And, it's so important to think about it in that regard, right? To have the right players on your team and not have the people that don't make sense on the team. Just going back to the ikigai thing for 1 second, and that is, again, a reason for being is what it loosely translates to when you translate it to English. And again, it's an ancient Japanese thought, and a whole lot of work has been done on that. And it's definitely something that you might want to look into. Also, if you go back, there's an episode that we recorded with AJ Sue as our guest. You can certainly listen to more of our ikigai conversation over there. And John, one thing I wanted to just talk about in terms of that, giving your team the ability to fail first and then setting out the rule. And I actually had this with one of my virtual assistants where she was working with me. It was the first one I actually hired many, many years ago. And I had 2 speaking engagements that I needed to deal with. One, I needed to decline, and the other I needed to confirm. And I told her, we need to confirm this one and decline that one, because they were around the same time, and I wasn't going to be able to do both of them because they were both a traveling speaking engagement. I think one was up in Boston and the other was out west somewhere. And so obviously the timing wasn't going to work. And she ended up completely messing it up. She confirmed the wrong one and declined the right one. And luckily, because all of her emails automatically copied me, I was able to undo the damage. But if it wasn't for the fact that I was so in the loop on it, I would have completely missed it. Now, first of all, having an assistant and me being in the loop was not one of the things I was looking for, but
Right.
I needed it because that was the way that I was learning to let go of certain things in the beginning and be able to have that trust with my assistants. And what I ended up doing was I told her, I said, look, I need you to tell me exactly how we are going to handle this. We have 2 choices. 1, we can part ways right now, or 2, we can figure out how to keep this from happening again. And what we ended up agreeing on was that we were going to see how we can prevent it from happening again. And I will say that for the next 2 years, that assistant, anytime there was a question in the future, double checked with me, what do I need to do? It wasn't, let me just assume that I understand the instructions. It was, let me double check if I have a question. There was a value in that I did not have that same problem happening again, but it also took more time. So think about what all of that means in that regard to how it's going to work on your own team. Like John is saying, and I mentioned also the number 2 person in your business. And sometimes that number 2, especially if you're a solopreneur, may be that virtual or executive assistant that you're bringing on. And so you really need to be clear in exactly how that is going to be translating to your overall business. They may not have the power to tell you yes and no, because they may simply be operating based on whatever you tell them. But if you're not giving the right direction, and you're not giving them that freedom to even say, wait a second, I think we can do it better, things may not work the same way. So think about how some of these things matter And certainly if you're in a bigger company, these are going to be aspects to your business that are going to be very different. So I want you just to think a little more strategically in that regard. But Jon, let me ask you, just as since we're running out of time on our show today, and people are interested in connecting with you, to learn more and to connect with you again, what would be the best way for them to reach out to you?
Yeah, I appreciate you asking that, Jennifer. So probably the best way is, weirdly enough, Instagram. I'm sure it'll be in the show notes, but it's Bellawood. So BELLEAUWOOD_coaching. I post a lot of free content on there, free videos. It's not like clickbait stuff. It's just me talking, and they're all professionally made. I'm pretty proud of it, to be honest with you, which is why I bring it up. But yeah, that's how they can connect me. Is probably the easiest and get a better vibe of who I am. And there's just I honestly created it based off of, we'll call him a digital mentor of mine. I can drop his name, Darren Hardy. If you've ever heard of him before, he does this thing called Darren Dailies, and I try and mimic something similar once a week, where I'm just dropping 90-second videos on a topic. So that's probably the best way to people to understand who I am and hopefully get some value out of the work that I'm doing.
Absolutely. Thank you. And again, like you were saying, Jon, it will be in the description for the episodes that you can connect with Jon, and we'll have all of Jon's information there so that you can certainly be reaching out. It's really important to think about leadership, because if you're not a leader, what are you? You're a follower. Mm-hmm. And do you really want to follow what everyone else is doing, or do you want to lead and be the one that people are looking up to? You even hear the term thought leadership, and it's so important. And what does thought leadership mean? It's like Jon was just saying, he puts those videos out every week where he's trying to help influence somebody's way of thinking. Yeah. It's a way that you can really be getting even more value from the audiences that are already around you. And then again, help to shape the conversation. These podcasts are another way of helping to shape the conversation. For those of you that have been listening for a long time, you have heard over the years all of the different ways and the guests that I have had and the different ways that they're encouraging you to be thinking. Again, goes back to that leadership. What is it that we're trying to do? We're trying to make you better in wherever you are. So, Jon, thank you so much for being my guest on the show today.
Jennifer, thank you so much for having me. This was a great conversation on just leadership, and I appreciate that a lot.
Absolutely. I appreciate it. And again, I want to thank everyone for their support over the years. Thank you for listening, and thank you for checking out this show. If it is your first time listening, thank you. And we encourage you again, tune in again next week. Every Tuesday, we drop our new episodes, so you can certainly be getting more and more of this kind of information. And if you really value it, leave us a comment, leave us a review, leave us a rating, whatever it is that you are interested in, to help us continue serving you. Because again, like Jon mentioned, servant leadership, right? You serve first. How are you providing? You serve first. You're giving to others. You're providing value. And that is exactly what we're trying to do here. On that note, this has been another episode of MOJO, the meaning of life and business. And until next time, here is to your success. This has been another episode of MOJO, the meaning of life and business podcast. If you like what you heard, please consider leaving us a review, liking us, or reaching out to us. You can contact us at bgsicoaching.com and let us know what you think. Thanks so much again for listening.